This is Egypt, a land believed to be mysterious yet full of wisdom. Atop a lone plateau sits the most epic view man has ever set his eyes on, the ancient wonder of the Egyptians. Throughout history, there have been various attempts to solve the riddles of the famed Giza complex. However, no group of peoples has succeeded in rewriting history thus far.
The reason why people can't come to a conclusion on Giza is because there are simply too many variables. You have astronomy factored in, which the geologists know absolutely nothing about. And then there's anthropology, religious studies, linguistics, another handful of people that are too specialized to see the big picture. I mean, don't get me wrong, these people are absolutely brilliant in their own fields, but in writing history, they fail to correlate their findings with the other areas of research.
The scientists are basically at war. On the one hand, you have historians in most textbooks claiming that Egyptian kings erected the monuments around 2500 BC based on carbon dating and historical inscriptions. And on the other hand, leading teams of geologists from all over the world have published and confirmed that water erosion facts of the Sphinx demand that Giza must be at least twice as old as originally thought. Can you believe that? At least twice as old.
If you didn't know already, the Giza pyramids are aligned to the exact placement of the stars in Orion's belt, and in 10,500 BC, Orion's belt was configured directly in position with where the Giza complex stands today. This was also the only time during the precession of the equinoxes in the age of Leo. This makes the period near 10,500 BC the most logical window for the pyramids and Sphinx to have been erected. The date is also important because it highlights the rapid ending of a glacial period, which scientists place at 9,500 BC. This glacial melting would have added enough water into the precipitation cycle to cause the torrential rains that eroded the Sphinx.
The flood is an interesting topic on its own because you have an assortment of religious stories from all over the world to work with. There's also plenty of anthropological evidence in Mesopotamia and China, so if you notice, we're kind of at a crossroads where religion and science collide.
There seems to be a detailed understanding of the arguments presented by various scientists and Egyptologists. However, alternate theories concerning the age of the Giza complex have given rise to many more questions. How does one explain the 2500 BC carbon dating? What about the historic inscriptions? And most importantly, why is the Sphinx water eroded and the pyramids not?
The inscriptions that point to 2500 BC are nothing short of graffiti marks. There are no actual priestly markings in the Great Pyramids, only graffiti, and this is because they were exploring the pyramids in 2500 BC just as we are doing today. And it's the same comprehension with the Sphinx. When comparing the Sphinx's head to its body, the ratios and rate of erosion geologically point out that the human face was carved out of the original lion's head. Again, ultimately graffiti.
The rocks that have been carbon dated to 2500 BC are obviously from 2500 BC. In fact, it's during this time that a lot of rebuilding and recasting was done. If you look at the Sphinx, you'll see stacked stones at the base, and these stones are not part of the original Sphinx. Throughout history, massive campaigns have been launched to restore the architecture, with the most memorable restoration occurring during 4th Dynasty Egypt. That's why carbon dating and stone compositions read to that specific time.
The pyramids were originally covered with 144,000 polished blocks of white limestone, so they say. This type of a shell probably got water eroded, rebuilt and then raided, with blocks transported to be used for construction in other buildings. This is a variable that could have added to the incorrect dating as well.
If all this is true, then we have a serious problem. This means that someone besides 4th Dynasty Egypt built Giza. And the architecture says that they did so in and around 10,500 BC, before glaciers were even melted. We're talking about an ancient antediluvian civilization that completely contradicts modern history. This is absolutely fantastic.
With little room left for argument, the new angle may face prejudice from the mainstream scientific community. The eccentric ideas are controversial at best, but perhaps new researchers see something that others may have missed. After all, the idea that Giza is from an ancient pre-flood civilization is nothing new.
The only other structure that can measure up to the Great Pyramid of Giza is the Great Pyramid of Cholula in Mexico, which, according to legend, was built by a giant that survived the flood. Also, after the pre-flood conquest of Ireland, the myth states that a friend of Noah's outcast son survives the Great Flood, eventually going on to build Stonehenge. Now, these stories attribute megastructures to pre-flood humans, meaning that Giza may have been founded by similar beings dating back to 10,500 BC.
The Great Pyramid of Cholula is referenced by the Aztecs to be the product of an antediluvian civilization. And even more interesting is their creation myth that not only agrees with the event of biblical flood, but also mentions all major planetary cataclysms leading up until doomsday.
Mesoamerican civilizations believe that there were 5 major creations, each after a great cataclysmic event, with the 4th destruction being an earth-wide flood. So if we study the first 3 destructions, we may get a better understanding of the Mesoamerican take on pre-flood civilization.
The 5th and final destruction is said to be by an earth element. This is a little scary because both the modern Abrahamic faiths and ancient pagan texts point to the end of time scenario where Earth is utterly destroyed by earthquakes. So it appears that there is a general consensus, both old and new, that we are living between the prophesied 4th and 5th destructions of Earth.
The first destruction of Earth occurs by wild beasts. The second is destruction by fire. The third by wind, then of course water and earth. Here you can see the first 3 destructions occurring before the flood. After the Earth recovers each time, a new empire emerges in a different location of the world. Therefore, it would be reasonable to say that each kingdom should have a record of the previous civilization.
There's an account on behalf of the Academy of Athens, and it is the only historical record we have. In the dialogue, Plato, Socrates, and a handful of other Greeks discuss Solon's recount of 9,000-year-old Atlantean history. Solon, the politician, had journeyed to the Egyptian temple in Neith, and there had received the ancient knowledge from a high priest.
The origins begin to push outside the boundaries of science, equating the ancient world to its mythological roots. The research has brought us this far, so one begs to ask, how important can Plato's writings be?
The Greek writings reveal the location of Atlantis with 3 major characteristics. First, that the Lost Kingdom is a continent due west of the Strait of Gibraltar. Second, that there are mountain ranges lining the east and west coasts. And lastly, it's a massive size, quoted to be larger than Europe.
So let's draw a line on a world map, going west from the Gibraltar Strait until we hit an island. Well, what have we run into? Good old US of A. Yes, it has the mountain ranges, and yes, it fits the size description.
According to the Academy of Athens, Greece becomes the world power of ancient Earth upon the fall of Atlantis. And if we read further, we can see that ancient Greece also receives a similar demise. The typhoid myth and various Greek writers suggest that a single remaining titan destroys the world with hurricanes, invades Olympus, and forces the rulers of ancient Greece to flee into Africa. So now, we finally have a literary proof from a different region that supports antediluvian cultures and their transfer of powers.
The name typhoon is still used today as typhoon, the term for Pacific hurricanes. So by matching Typhon's devastation with the Mesoamerican destruction by wind, we can use the Mesopotamia king list and the Mesoamerican sun chart to define the ancient ages in reference to the regions in which the kings ruled. Typhon marks the second Titan war, with the first war being the epic Titanomachy. In the Norse mythology, the first Titan war is called Ragnarok, and like the Greek story, the main method of worldwide destruction is fire, so there is an immediate correlation with the Mesoamerican destruction by fire.
It does get uncomfortable for some people when looking to 10,000 BC and beyond, especially going 3 ages back in time because we're simply in a world of mythology.
It doesn't look good as the theories become a tangle of mythological proportions. Even with a detailed explanation, it would be rough proving that the events actually occurred. Therefore, researchers will need to find more substantial proof of civilized life prior to 10,000 BC.
There is only one other megastructure in the world that could rival the dating of Giza, and believe it or not, this massive structure sits on the ocean floor and is halfway around the world. I guess you could say we were born in the right era of discovery, because this is the geological miracle that we've been searching for.
The Yonaguni ruins are a spectacular find, absolutely phenomenal. You have gigantic stone structures on the seafloor. Now, the debate has been corrupted by people who haven't even read Schock's or West's publications. Schock, a leading geologist, has set forth the original American stance that the rock formations were once natural and then modified by man before sinking into the waters.
The reason why scientists keep an open mind is because it's hard to deny any visual evidence at the site. These are high-resolution pictures taken by divers. You can clearly make out staircases and shrines with perfect angles of symmetry, something that's rare with an object this old. Now, the dating has been revised over the years because sampling algae and organism deposits can be tricky.
The first carbon dating conducted by the Japanese placed the monument at a minimum of 6,000 BC. And then we even have the revision date of 8,000 to 10,000 BC. This places the sinking of the megalith at the end of the last ice age, which coincidentally coincides with the flood date and the water erosion of the Sphinx.
During the last glacial period, Asia had become a continental glacier. This means that Yonaguni and other islands around it weren't islands at all. The entire region was landlocked by huge sheets of ice. People could walk from Taiwan to Japan. But when the sheets of ice began to melt or break away, the civilization built on top naturally sunk to the bottom. And oddly enough, Blavatsky states that the lost civilization of Lemuria sunk into the sea as well.
Blavatsky is less of a scientific approach and a little too esoteric for my taste, but the etymology of Lemuria does allude to the land of Mu from Mayan mythology. Now, Le Plongeon probably got his information from hearsay, because that's what his mistranslation suggests. However, Churchwell and Kimura have had some real progress in revealing Mu in history, most notably in Churchwell's publication on the studies he conducted with Indian priests, revealing the people of Mu to be the first humans on Earth under the rule of their god Ra.
So Churchwood has linked Mu to King Ra of the Turan king list, who is the first ruler of the ancient world. This puts Mu at the oldest of the ancient kingdoms. So we have ancient Lemuria, ancient Atlantis, ancient Greece, and ancient Egypt with their corresponding cataclysmic events.
The underwater ruin of Yonaguni is the first sign of scientific evidence, aside from the Sphinx, that provides support for ancient civilization, and the king's lists from different sources seem to agree. This may be enough to convince some people, but others seem far too believing for this to be the only evidence.
So, if America is a pre-flood Atlantis, then we should be able to find geological evidence of civilization within the region still flooded. This would include all shallow waters of Bahamas, Caribbean islands, the Everglade marshlands, and Bermuda Island, constituting the explanation for the Devil's Triangle.
There's a ridiculous amount of new data coming in for Atlantean seaports. Within the Bermuda Triangle, we have the Andros Platform and Bimini Road. All early commentaries, again, misinterpreted by people who know absolutely nothing about sea architecture.
Bimini is even published with the uranium-thorium dating to 15,000 BC, and both geological sites are proven to have been the same landmass above water during the last glacial period. Now this is as scientific as one can get.
Bimini was revisited and aired on Sci-Fi in 2006 with Dr. Little really proving the artificiality of the road. Without this recent discovery, all we had was myth. Now, everything has become so much more than elaborate storytelling. Scientifically speaking, this stuff is very real.
India's Bay of Cambay and Penghu of China both have had similar teams dive down and retrieve data from ancient ruins dating back 9,500 BC to 30,000 BC. So we don't need the Greek verification. They can keep their underwater ruins unpublished, but it was really never a secret to begin with. After all, ancient mythology is best known and studied amongst the Greeks than any other post-flood empire.
There have been individual reports of illegal scuba experiences in Greece. However, due to the nature of these events, it would be unwise to reiterate them without proof. Therefore, we would be better off sticking to the ruins of other civilizations.
If, in fact, we are right about the older dating of Giza and other megalithic structures like Yonaguni and Bimini, we are going to be dealing with highly advanced civilizations, unfathomable empires probably ruled by great kings.
The geological evidence from different regions of the world all seem to point to a new history for mankind, a history that existed during the last ice age. It is only with the new information discovered in the last 10 years that the students are able to put the data together. The new insight gives an open opportunity to reveal shocking conclusions as to who built the megalithic cities.
Answering who is a lot harder than any other question, mainly because we are looking at pre-flood beings, most of which are noted in the Bible and Quran, in addition to pagan texts. So because of the religious connotation, evolutionists are very skeptical in admitting that these holy books have historic truths, probably due to the ongoing war with creationists.
We are evolutionists, and we believe in evolution and the millions of years required and the scientific proofs behind it. This is not some lofty disguised form of creationism, no. This is historic and scientific explanation of world religion, which in turn will answer the questions about the greatest wonder of the world.
When dealing with comparative religion, you have to have original proofs of foundation. So we have the Sumerian king list and the Turan royal canon, both of which list the original pre-flood rulers, and out of the 7 to 8 names listed as mythological kings, only one rings the alarm with pre-flood characters.
Suta, the Egyptian god translated into Coptic Egyptian, phonetically spells Seth, Sigma Eta Theta. And we only have one pre-flood Seth in all Abrahamic faiths, and that is Seth, the son of Adam and Eve.
Biblical Seth, synonymous with Islamic Sheath, is handed down kingship from his father Adam. And the magic really begins to happen when you look at Egyptian Set's father and brother, whom are also on the king's list. This would mean that Adam corresponds to Jeb, and either Cain or Abel corresponds to Osiris.
The hieroglyphic spelling of Set's name in English is SWTH and pronounced Suta, the original Egyptian storm god. Now, using the ancient Greek writings, we know that Greece was ruled by one god king in its time. His name, like Suta, is pronounced Zeus, so the Greek list can now be used as a reference as well.
It's interesting to note that Zeus has two brothers as biblical Seth did, and it is further reaffirmed through Plato's writings, which hold Poseidon as ruler of Atlantis. Now, the Sumerian list names Poseidon's equivalent as a shepherd, and this is a little too perfect. The only shepherd of pre-flood times in monotheistic texts is Abel, son of Adam, thus leaving Hades as the equivalent of Cain.
A shocking series of revelations begin to unfold as we begin to break down ancient mythology to its historic roots. The addition of a Greco-Roman king list and an Abrahamic king list help contrast the more modern incarnations of ancient rulers.
So after Zeus defeats Typhon, the new empire is formed in Africa, and this is when Giza comes into play. This is the legendary site where 4 of the ancient Earth Kings were buried. Kronos beneath the Great Pyramid, Zeus under the middle one, and Hermes under the smallest. This is where they were buried thousands of years ago before the flood. And not only were these kings from the Sumerian and Turan king lists, but they are also noted in Vedic, Biblical, and Quranic scripture, ruling in the early years of intelligent Homo sapiens. These ancient rulers are more commonly known today as Adam, Seth, and Enoch.
In the religious canon of Abrahamic faiths, the major pre-flood prophets consisted of Adam, Seth, and Enoch. Out of the early patriarchs, Enoch is by far the most versatile king of the old world. He's been equated with Greek Hermes and Egyptian Thoth, earning him the title of Hermes Thrice Wise.
The rest of the kings fall into place very easily. If we look at the remaining human kings, we have Dumuzid, aka Abel the Shepherd, whom is completely left out of Egyptian archives. And we also have his brother, the Egyptian Osiris, aka Hades, who's obscure in Aztec myth. The reason for the lack of fame in opposing regions is because of the simple fact that Cain and Abel were enemies.
The Apocrypha of John states, Elohim has a bear face and Yahweh has a cat face. The one is righteous, but the other is unrighteous. Yahweh he set over the fire and the wind, and Elohim he set over the water and the earth. And these he called with the names Cain and Abel.
Here we have a highly esoteric religious text, bridging biblical pre-flood kings with pagan deities of Egyptian and Greeks. You have the elemental ties to Hades and Poseidon, and animism, which is thought to be unique only amongst Egyptian hieroglyphs. The animism of Cain is most important because intelligent species from the order of Carnivore are mentioned several times in Christian canon and Aztec myth as well. Also, we know that Cain is forbidden an honorable burial because he murdered Abel. This means that he would not be buried in a pyramid at all, and there is only one burial site aside from the pyramids from his era that is marked by his lion insignia, and that is the Great Sphinx.
The Great Sphinx is in fact a tomb. Every Egyptologist will agree that there's an ancient king buried beneath it, and his name's Osiris. This is devastating information for the skeptics because it really brings together the ties between Cain and Hades and the various other names of the ancient ruler.
The researchers are quick to point fingers and name names, giving the ancient world a shape never seen before. Though loosely based on religious and historical texts, the overlapping data and archetypes seem to do the ancient kings justice. With these new ideas, future scientists should be keen on discovering evidence to either support or refute such claims, for such theories may lead to revisions in modern history, biology, and religion.
Abel, aka Poseidon, is buried somewhere in Atlantis. The Aztec myth puts him at the Great Pyramid of Cholula, which is re-erected by one of his surviving descendants immediately following the flood. And the final king, titled the Sun God, is associated with the Pyramid of the Sun, also in Mesoamerica.
He was known as Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, and may have been the primary target of the flood. His Egyptian equivalent is linked to Horus and the city of Heliopolis.
This feathered being was known as Horus to the Egyptians and Helios to the Greeks. His heir erected this city of the sun, Heliopolis, so it's safe to say that Horus and Thoth were contemporaries and possibly rivals, equivalent to biblical Seth Enoch and Cain Enoch, the last of the ancient Earth Kings.
The search for truth concerning Giza has brought us to the realms of Atlantis and Lemuria, through the annals of Greek and Aztec mythology, and finally back to Egypt's mysterious origin. The journey of enlightenment has taken us where few people have gone, allowing us to hear radical new ideas.
We have even taken this a step further and analyzed the genotypes of ancient beings and the reason for their animalistic appearances, but in doing so we have questioned the very essence of creation and evolution of man.
Many scientists who study Sumerian and Babylonian religion support the Nibiru Planet X theory, in which the astronauts arrived on Earth, seeding it with intelligence by using native apex species and hybridizing them with their own advanced DNA. I know it sounds like some hijacked plot out of a science fiction script, but I assure you that the ancient clay tablets speak for themselves.
If the Earth was indeed visited in the ancient past, it could explain some of the missing links in the evolutionary theory. This jump occurs in the last glacial period between 40,000 and 20,000 years ago, the same time in which hybridization could have occurred with seeded beings described in ancient myth.
This evolutionary schism forces one to understand that the first Homo sapiens may have been Enoch, aka the Monkey King, and his descendants, because if you trace his lineage, you will see that Noah is the final descendant with unscathed DNA, and his sons go on to give birth to the human race that we are today.
If you take a step back and explain this in simple terms, ancient Earth, huge empires, god kings and aliens, then no one's gonna believe you. But if you can dissect the entire thesis into proofs concerning who, what, where, when, and why, then you might have a fair chance at convincing the mainstream community.
It all makes perfect sense if you understand anything about Mesoamerican or Egyptian pyramids. The goal was to transport the deceased soul, meaning that these ancient beings were attempting to travel to the afterlife instantaneously. So what we're saying is that the pyramids are the technological burial devices in which such a feat is accomplished.
Now we have to get the published scientists and the theologians, get them together, have some commentary, because this is the topic in which we need to dive into as a collective human race. This is our beginning, and we need to know what the hell happened.
The scientific proofs and literary interpretations are enough to leave veteran scientists questioning the very foundation on which they study. Will they choose to reopen the books and give these theories the attention that they deserve? Or will history repeat itself and lose the knowledge of the ancients?
The Bosnian pyramids are a great new find. Researchers carbon dated a leaking shaft to be about 5000 BC, meaning that the modified mountains are probably up to 5 times older, and because of their location, may be the resting place of pre-flood beings of ancient Greece.
Planet X is due back soon, so I guess we could just wait and ask God himself.
So yeah, we're basically trying to tell you that the gods and goddesses of old did exist, but were they divine?